Hello, folks. Welcome back to the Podcast Digest. This is Dan Lizette, episode 114. Thanks for coming back and checking out another great interview. Wanted to let you know right up front, this episode in the Podcast Digest as a whole is brought to you by listeners like you, supporters of the show on Patreon. There is a link on the show notes. Support the show for as little as $1 a month. I would really appreciate it. It's also brought to you by Podbean, this week's sponsor. Podbean is podcast hosting and monetization. It's the easiest way to start a podcast. If you go to podbean.com/TPD, you'll learn more all about what they offer and to get your first month free. I'll tell you more about Podbean in just a little bit. But let's get to this week's show. My guest this week, the one and only David Sparks from Mac Power Users and Free Agents. I've been listening to Mac Power Users for a very long time, as I have made no qualms about in the past. I'm a huge Apple fan. I'm a Mac user. I am producing the show right now on my Mac Mini. I also have the Apple Watch, the iPhone 7 Plus, the iPad Pro, a MacBook Pro. You get the idea. I'm all in on the Apple ecosystem after having tried Android and Windows, so nobody jump on me for that. I know what that's like as well. So I've been listening to Mac Power Users and David Sparks for a very long time. It is one of my required listenings each and every week that a brand new Mac Power Users come out. And the newest show, Free Agents, which we're going to talk about as well, is with another fellow guest here on the Podcast Digest. Jason Snell is David's co-host for that. Both shows hosted on Relay FM, by the way. And there is a wonderful conversations happen over there every episode about working for yourself, striking out on your own, and what that process is like. And so if you're considering doing something like that, I can't recommend Free Agents enough. As I mentioned, this was a huge honor for me. I've been a David Sparks fan and all of his works for a very long time. I've read his books, listened to his shows, and generally kind of followed things with him for a very long time. So this was cool, and I had a blast doing it, and I hope you have a blast listening to it. So without further ado, let's get to my conversation with David Sparks. All right, folks, as I mentioned up front, let's get right to the conversation. Super honored to be joined by my guest this week. David Sparks is a host of really an absolute cathedral of Apple and Mac-based podcasting, Mac Power Users, with his co-host Katie Floyd, and has a new show as well with Relay FM, and I'm really excited to talk to him about both of them. So, David Sparks, welcome to the Podcast Digest.
Thanks for having me.
Thanks for joining me. And I mentioned briefly before we hit the buttons here, I have been listening to your voice for a very long time on Mac Power Users. I don't know exactly when I hopped in, 100 something. I think it was later in the hundreds. I know it was back in the 5x5 days. I was definitely listening then. Wow. So lots to talk about. But before we jump into all the great stuff with your podcast, I want folks to get to know you just a little bit. Can you tell folks a little bit about yourself, folks who are not familiar with you?
Sure. I'm a geek at the most foundational level. And I've always been kind of nerdy, and in this wonderful world of podcasting, I was able to talk about it to people. So I have a podcast called the Mac Power Users, where me and Katie Floyd talk about technology. It's not a news show. It's more of a content show. So like we'll do a show on how to get good at email, or a show where we interview somebody interesting about how they use their technology to get their work done. So it's kind of a productivity slant to the stuff. We don't talk much about news. And I also host a show with my friend Jason Snell called Free Agents, and we are both independent workers. So we talk about the challenges we face as independent workers, and whether or not it makes sense for people. We hear a lot from our listeners, with questions. So we talk about all sorts of things there as well. In addition, I have a website I publish called MacSparky.com. That's Apple-focused productivity type stuff. And I'm a business lawyer, so I got a few things going on.
and a husband and a parent, you mentioned several times, yes.
Yes, I am. My kids are growing up on me, though.
Yeah, purveyor of the full plate. That is you, Mr. Sparks, that's for sure.
It's all fun.
I love to talk with folks that have been in this podcasting space a very long time, kind of about the very beginning. Can you tell us how did you get started? What was the very first show you were part of, and what sort of was the conversation around that time?
Yeah, I'm like I said at the beginning, I'm a geek, so I was listening to geeky podcasts at the beginning, and there was a friend of mine who's passed away now, Tim Verporten, who had a show called the Mac Review Cast, and this was probably 2007-ish, And he would every week publish reviews that people wrote and recorded and sent in. So Tim and I had become friends, and I sent in a couple of reviews. That was the first thing I ever did on air, and then it kind of grew from that. I did a little for a short period, MacSparky Screencast podcast, which had a very short-lived life. It just, making screencasts is hugely time-consuming. I still do it, but I don't do it in a podcast form. And then eventually my friend Katie Floyd and I got together and decided to do a show. And there was actually, that's probably a whole nother story, but it was actually quite a bit of work getting Mac Power Users off the ground.
Definitely something I want to talk about. But before we go all in on the podcast thing, there's something else that when you mentioned the screencast, first of all, of course, Don McAllister's name jumped to mind, but it also made me think of some of the other things you do. You're also a author, correct?
Yes, I am. I have
one more title.
I've written 7 books. The first 2 I did for a big time publisher. One was called iPad at Work. The other one was called Mac at Work. And those were, bookie books, the kind you go into the bookstore and buy. And about 2012, I started self-publishing with what I call the MacSparky Field Guide series, primarily sold through the iBookstore, but also sold PDFs at MacSparky.com. And so I've published 5 of those. I've got another one in the works right now. And I also occasionally, they're interesting books. Once again, my whole kind of slant to all this is trying to find ways to be more productive. And so the books I write for the field guides, like I did one on being paperless and one on managing email, one on giving presentations, that kind of stuff. Occasionally people say, well, I really wish you would do one on some specific application. And for those, I do video field guides, which are, it's like a book, the last one I did was Hazel, and I released that. Don't quote me on this. I think it's close to 3 hours long. It's a long screencast, but by the time you get to the end, you are an expert at using the application Hazel. So depending on what product or what I'm trying to convey, I'll either do a book or a video field guide, and those are a lot of fun too.
Is there one of these mediums between podcasting and writing and the screencast that you get a particular, level of satisfaction out? Is it sort of a different experience? Is there one maybe you enjoy the process more than the other? How does that work?
I really enjoy all of the stuff I do as MacSparky. I mean, I said once on the podcast that I think MacSparky saved my life. And I really mean that because, I was so busy being a lawyer and, kind of caught up in that day-to-day stuff. I felt kind of disconnected from myself. And as I started doing this stuff and making so many friends in the community. And as you know, once you start podcasting, you get emails from people all over the world, and you just feel like, I don't know, it really makes you feel good. And so I think I really enjoy the whole process. And if something I don't enjoy, I just don't do it anymore. So I don't know if I could pick a favorite, but creating media to help people become a little bit more productive in their lives. Like once in a while I get an email from somebody saying, hey, I was able to get home earlier to my kids because something you showed me. That makes it all worth it for me.
And you know what I think, and tell me if you feel differently. I think for every email you get, there's probably another 25 people out there who got a similar benefit, but maybe just didn't take the time to email. I know from the hundreds of hours I've spent listening to Mac Power Users, I don't know how many times I've gone over into the links, launched the App Store, taken a look at something, and several times integrated something into my regular day-to-day. And I have to confess, I didn't send an email to you guys about that, but that happened. And that's that. Even knowing that you're just receiving kind of like that top 1 or 2% of the impact you're making, when you kind of expand that out, that's got to be really satisfying.
Yeah, I sometimes call it little touches versus big touches. Like as a lawyer, when somebody comes to me with a problem, it's a big deal. It's a big part of their life, and it's my job is to help them solve a really big problem, which is very rewarding. But you can only do that for so many people because it's so time consuming. As a podcaster, the happy chemicals I get are from little touches. It's not the same as, keeping somebody out of a huge problem, but it is still rewarding. And when you hear from those people all over the world that are just getting a little bit, their lives are just a little bit better for something you do, that's just as satisfying. So to me, that's kind of the drug that pulls me into podcasting and blogging and all these things. And I bet that would be true for a lot of other podcasters too.
I definitely agree with that summary as well. I think when you hear that feedback from people about a difference you made, I mean, for me it's a little bit different. I usually hear about, I didn't know that about that host, or I didn't know about this show. Thanks for telling me about it type deal. Maybe I'm just providing entertainment or more info, but it's still a level of satisfaction. So I can certainly appreciate what that feedback does. You alluded to it earlier, David. Now I have to ask, tell us about the Mac Power user's origin story.
Yeah, it was, so Katie, my co-host, is also an attorney. So we were at Macworld together, and they said, you guys should make a show together, and at the time, I was involved with podcasting, doing a lot of guesting and, adding content to a lot of other people's shows. But I wasn't entirely convinced that we needed another Macintosh podcast. And we were definitely thinking Macintosh at the time. I mean, this was really before iOS became a thing. And I just felt like, any concept you thought of was already done. Well, some would say, well, you should take a show where you go through the news and talk about what's new and how it matters. And I'm like, that, you mean like Mac Break Weekly? And they'd say, yeah. I'm like, well, why would I want to do that? Mac Break Weekly is already doing that.
Right.
And that's a very popular show format because it's pretty, easy in terms of prep. And so Katie and I were kicking around ideas, and I would want to say we spent about 6 months, kind of, at least 4 months, I know, kind of figuring out what we wanted to do with the show. And ultimately I asked myself, well, what is the show that's not out there that I would like to listen to? And for me, it was a show that talked about how to get better at this stuff, give me kind of a basic primer. We call the show Mac Power Users. It's very much aspirational. I mean, we don't expect people listening to it to be, John Siracusa level experts. In fact, those guys probably don't care about a show like ours, but we want to bring people up that are interested in getting better at this stuff and just need a little help. So that was the idea. We'll take specific content, and later we added the idea of having guests occasionally too. And when I pitched it to Katie, she says, that's a great idea, but we will only have 10 episodes because,
I've heard that story. I love that.
Yeah.
I love that.
And she was serious, I'm like, well, there'll be 10 really good episodes. And that's what we wanted to do. So we said, let's just go with it and see what happens. And the rest is history. I mean, it went great. And we're now at show 340 something, rapidly approaching 350. And we have a big list of things we still want to talk about. So it's great. So
the idea was originally 10. At what point after you guys sat down to start recording?
Katie's thought it would only last 10. I was convinced it would be bigger than that. I don't know. I just felt like there's always things to talk about.
When did Katie come around? Like after 2, after 3? Did she realize there was something here, or did you have to convince her?
I don't think it took long. I mean, we immediately had a nice big audience burst when we started, and the feedback was really positive. And I just started looking at, I think I put together at one point early in our development, like a list of 30 topics. I said, well, here's 30 we can start with, and we, it continues to grow. And now we've been on the air since 2009. Some of them we go back and hit again because things change. So there's plenty to talk about.
In 2007, when you guys launched, and again, I didn't necessarily, I don't think I was even in the Mac world at that point. I'm a Johnny-come-lately. I'm one of those halo effects from iOS, then leading into the Mac, and so on and so forth. I was one of those guys. But back then, did you guys, for those of you who don't know, Mac Power Users is now homed at Relay FM, has been for a good bit, but prior was on 5x5. When you guys launched, was it with 5x5, or were you just independent immediately?
No, we were independent for quite a while. I think a couple of years or so. I mean, I don't know. At some point, Merlin, a man, was on 5x5, and he said, you should think about going over there. And so we talked to Dan, and we went over to 5x5 for several years.
And that was Dan Benjamin, for anyone who doesn't know. Yeah. What was the 5x5 experience like?
It was good. I mean, we had never been on a network before, and there's certain benefits to that. And and eventually we ended up over at Relay, and we're very happy. I don't know what you're supposed to do making a new podcast these days, because I haven't made that many new ones recently. But there are definite benefits if you fit into a network. I'm sure there's an audience boost because you can can get tapped into that feed. I don't think any of these networks are really super great at cross promotion, but but maybe gives you a little credibility. I don't know. If someone came to me and said, I'm starting a new show, should I go on a network or not? I don't think I have a clear answer for them.
When you guys were independent in the early days, had you already started to see growth and growth overall in the sense that this was becoming part of an income? Were you guys already sort of independently selling ads, or did that not happen till later?
No, Katie and I blundered through the whole thing. We
made it up as you went.
Advertisers were contacting us saying, "Hey, when we started it, we never even discussed advertising. It was early days. I mean, it wasn't that common of a thing." And then we started having people contact and say, "Hey, I really like your show. We'd like to sponsor it." And it was Jean McDonald at Smile. She's not there anymore, but she says, "Hey, we'd like to sponsor your show." I said, "Okay, well, what are we supposed to charge you? Because we have no idea."
Right.
Yeah, that's kind of how we got started. And we call them, between Katie and I, we call them the legacy sponsors, people who really approached us early, like 1Password and Smile, and some of those sponsors are still with us to this day, which is awesome.
Yeah, that is. And what's funny is, I don't know, probably a good majority of those legacy sponsors that you guys have, your show was the first time I'd ever heard of them. And now I'm wildly familiar with them. And it started because I heard about it on, the early days of Mac Power Users.
Yeah.
And that's obviously what some of those advertisers are going for. That's for sure. So, and when you guys decided to join 5x5, I imagine Merlin's a hard guy to say no to, one. But two, was it also because sort of the audience had gotten to a certain level and you had these advertisers knocking on the door? Was there a benefit to sort of helping share that load? Was that part of the thought process?
Not really. I mean, we still to this day manage a significant portion of our advertising, and when we went over to 5x5, that continued, and it's continued to a certain extent at Relay. So we have some advertisers that come in from the network, and we have some that we sell directly.
Interesting stuff. What about?
Yeah, no, we're kind of weirdos because we've been around so long.
Well, I think that's what makes it such an interesting story, because you guys are sort of a legacy show, if you will, in the sense that we're around before a lot of networks really were as prevalent as they are nowadays. What about some of the other aspects like marketing and promotion and those type of things? Are you guys still managing that, or do 5x5/Relay today now kind of handle some of that?
I mean, there's benefits. Like, for instance, Relay has an excellent app, and if you're into that, you can download the app and listen.
Now with stickers. Yeah,
and there's I noticed they've got a Mac Power User sticker in there, and the spy hat from Free Agent, so that's cool that they put it in there, and so we'd certainly get some benefit from that. It really is a mixture, and I haven't really figured out how to quantify what comes from us being us and us being on the network. But there's definite benefits to the whole thing. One of my favorite benefits of being on Relay is there's a Slack channel that is kind of for the hosts in the background. And it's some of my favorite people, and we all are friends, and we've all spent time together over the years, and it's just a great little community. It's like a mini Twitter without any of the terribleness that comes with Twitter. I mean, I like Twitter, but there's some terrible stuff going on there.
That's for sure. And, I've said this a lot of time. I mean, some of the people that you've mentioned, Jason Snell, John Syracuse, Mike Hurley, Stephen Hackett have all been previous guests of mine, and I have said this to just about all of them, and I'll say the same to you. As a listener, as one who's been a tech super fan for a long time, I really do stand in awe at what Mike and Stephen have assembled as a roster at, sort of the draw of some of the biggest names from a lot of the other networks or independent shows that have sort of come together to create that one-stop shop for any real technology fan, especially an Apple-centric one, to be able to find all of you awesome hosts in sort of one place. I think it's amazing what they've done, and I'm super excited to see what's coming up next.
Yeah, it's really impressive the way they've managed that.
And hats off to them for sure. Let's talk a little bit about Katie, the other half of Mac Power Users. You guys obviously have been together a long time on this show. I'm kind of curious, sort of, how's that interaction been? How do you guys sort of divide labor, if you will, topic research, assembling things, production process? Take us through how you guys sort of work together week in and week out.
Yeah, I think one of the good things about the relationship with me and Katie is we banter and tease each other often, and yes, we do that in real life too. So it's kind of nice, and we have an old friendship, which makes it easy for us to do that stuff to each other. But in terms of the workload, I think we both really carry our weight. It depends on the show topic, just depending on what we're covering. But one of us will always kind of take the lead in getting the show outlined and together. I mean, one of the things about a show like we do is you can't just kind of make it up as you go along. You have to spend a significant time preparing. If you're going to teach people about something, you've got to make sure you've got your ducks in a row before you turn the microphone on. We just did a show, for instance, on comparing Dropbox to iCloud, super nerdy topic, but it was important. And I spent about 3 or 4 months running tests between the two, and I really took the lead in that one, getting the outline together and, putting together the points that I thought were important. So that one I would take the lead on. But, Katie the next one we do may be something that she's really passionate about. Like we've done a couple shows on cord cutting, and Katie's really into that. And she's bought antennas and has tons of good opinions on it. So depending on what we cover, one of us or the other will take the lead and working on an outline. We usually start with a Google Doc, and sometimes they're months in the works, like the iCloud versus Dropbox one was a long time planning. Sometimes they come together a lot faster. It just depends. But at some point we get the outline to a point where we say, okay, we're ready to do a show on this. And then we'll record the show. And the back end of it, what we do is we've got an editor, a person who does the recording, does the pass at the edit for us. And then we have a recording. And Katie and I take turns. One of the secrets of the Mac Power Users, to the extent you want to get inside baseball, is I always kick off odd episodes and she kicks off even ones. So you can tell, it's just an easy way for us to split it up. And we've extended that over time to whoever, if it's an odd one, I'm responsible for getting the show notes put together. Although we do get help from some listeners and guests sometimes to help us get the show notes together. But I'm responsible for getting the file uploaded to Libsyn. I'm responsible for getting the chapter markers in, for, making sure everything's ready and hitting the publish button. And then the next week when it's an even episode, it's Katie's job. And it works out really nice. So we're both kind of carrying the load that way. And we're always, if one of us has something going on in their lives, I've got kids and Katie's got a bunch of family commitments. If for some reason one of us can't do it, the other one will pick up for her. It just kind of works out.
And what's funny is I'm sitting here listening to this description, David, and I've always thought you guys are sort of like the yin to one's yang. You know what I mean? It's sort of that two halves type deal. Because I'll be honest with you, confession time here, David. A couple times a few years ago, I sort of wondered, like, were you guys sort of aggravating each other at some point? And
I aggravate Katie all the time.
Because but it sounds like more this is an old friendship. There's a lot of needling and it's all good, but sometimes it can come across as sort of you guys sort of poking at each other.
Yeah, well, we do poke at each other a little bit.
I think that's one of the things that makes it entertaining, really, because there is that sort of complementary personality. Because it seems like in a lot of topics, you guys do come from somewhat different places, which is ironic given the fact that you both sort of have the same day job if you are similar day jobs. Yeah. But you guys definitely have different takes. One of the things I'm interested about was you talked about how you're sort of teaching somebody a topic. Yeah. That could sort of ebb towards a more instructional side. I don't often feel like it's instructional. Sometimes I feel like it's more just sharing. And one of my favorite parts of the show is that you guys always bring in sort of your personal perspectives, what devices you have, what you're thinking about upgrade, how you do things. Was that ever a sort of strategic conversation about how much of your own personal use was going to be kind of integrated into these episodes?
No, but I always felt like that was kind of part of it. I mean, people want, at the end of the day, they just want to know, well, what are you doing and why? And that's the same reason why we bring guests in, because I don't think they just want to know what Katie and I are doing and why, but they want to hear from other people too. And we solicit people that disagree with us, because if we feel like we had a recent guest, because both of us have been using Drobos for years. I mean, Drobo's a sponsor of the show, so full disclosure. I mean, they gave me one, but I've bought one too, and and I really like them. But everybody's also talking about some of the Drobo competitors. So we had some people in that use those. Well, tell us the story. Let's hear what's good about that. And we always try and respect the listeners and give them the best information. I don't know. It's funny. Katie and I, we definitely have different opinions on things. One of the recent things that was funny on the show is I think that Katie is more of the disciplined person of the two of us.
I would agree as a listener.
And I sometimes in the she is ready, fire, aim, and sometimes I'm fire, ready, aim. And I bought a second iPad, so I have two iPad Pros, and yes. I told her about that on the air, and it was quite delightful, her reaction.
Well, she raged against the 12.9, right? She returned that one immediately, if I remember correctly.
She did return it. I don't know how long she kept it.
Yeah, I think it was, if I remember, it was within that 14 days. Right. Yeah. And then the 9.7 still was a little convincing for her to finally pick it up, if I remember correctly. But and so I guess for her to hear you, I got two, she was like, what?
Yeah, exactly. You insane.
And that's one of the great things is because, what's funny is that I think my personal habits align much more with yours, David, but my conscious is very much like Katie's, right? Yeah. Where it's like, this is what we probably should, be doing or not doing. She kind of has that side of the conversation. And so it's a great listen, folks, for anyone who is into this stuff, because you do get both sides of that coin.
Yeah.
Allow me to jump in just a moment, folks, and take a quick break and tell you about this week's show sponsor. It is, of course, Podbean. Podbean is podcast hosting and monetization, and they've got so many cool features that I want to tell you about because, a lot of people listening right now, you're probably a podcaster, or maybe you're just a super fan, maybe considering starting your own. And I want you to consider Podbean because they've got so many great things to offer. When you set up with them, they're going to include a website for your show, of course. It's very much like a blog. You're going to be able to customize all kinds of themes and colors associated with that. They've, of course, got comprehensive podcast stats. That's a big deal. I talk about that a lot. I am a stat junkie. I don't hide that fact. I check stats way too often, and Podbean will provide those to you. They're going to easily integrate with your own website. If you've got a website you already love, you can integrate Podbean into that. Of course, all the RSS and iTunes support you would ever need. If you wanted to import your show to them and redirect, it's all supported to migrate over to Podbean. You can get an app. Popular apps for both Android and iOS are offered. You're going to be able to share your show easily with a quality embeddable player. That's a big deal. People can listen right there with that player. And all kinds of things that you're going to need. An online directory so people can find your show through the Podbean website. Promotional opportunities. And they offer really interesting stuff in monetization. Right? You can make your show premium if you wanted to put maybe special episodes behind a paywall. It's got an advertising platform and even a patron program as well. All of this and so much more is all offered through Podbean. So check them out. Now, here's the cool part. If you want to take a look, go to podbean.com/TPD for the Podcast Digest. Using that code will tell them that you came from this show. You'll get your first month free as well. Check them out. My thanks to Podbean for supporting the Podcast Digest. Now, back to the interview. So let me ask you guys this, or ask you this about sort of how you two work together. You mentioned kind of sharing the load with the work and so on and so forth, but what's more interesting to me at this point is you brought in the idea of guests, and that is one of the best things because over these almost 350 episodes, you guys have had an amazing guest list. Talk to me about the decision to bring those on and what this ride has been like getting to talk to some of these great people.
It was after we had been podcasting. When we first started, we were doing 2 a month, and now we do 1 a week. But when we first started, it was just us. And once we realized that the format would work, my concern was, well, that's great, but you're going to get tired of hearing to these two lawyers talk about, what email client they like the best. And there's a lot of smart people out there doing interesting things that have a different perspective than us. So we wanted to stretch it out. And so over the years, we've had many, many different like professions and interests. We had people who are artists and people who are actors and producers and directors, and Aisha Tyler, I think she's our biggest movie star type that we had on.
Right.
But we had David Wayne and some other folks as well. We've had doctors. We had a blind a physics PhD student who is doing this amazing stuff with her Mac, which is one of my favorite stories of the show. Someone at NASA was listening, and then they gave her an internship, and I think it turned into a job. So, I mean, she got a job at NASA
awesome.
through our show, which was amazing to me. And, just all sorts of types. We had David Allen, the productivity guru. We've had just a lot of different. Merlin Mann was our first one, by the way. He was really great. And so we've had just a lot of different guests over the years, and it's always a delight to have them on. And when we prep those shows, those are easier to prep because it's not as much research. I have two questions. I said, what are you doing that's interesting, and how are you doing it? And that almost always leads into a conversation that lasts at least an hour.
Well, there have been so many great guests, and it's like sort of inquisitive before Mike retired that, or what I hope I'm doing to some of my listeners. It tends to then spiral out for the listener into either that person's website or blog or their podcast or whatever it is that they're doing. I remember, I think the very first time I ever heard of or found out about Clayton and Natalie Morris was through your show. I believe you had Clayton several times, if I recall now. And from there, I started following both of them on Twitter and found out that, he appears on this show and that show. And that was one of the type of things that I imagine a lot of people do when they see your guest list. They end up following them and what they work on.
We hope so. I mean, we really want it to be a launch platform for other folks.
Have you come across any of these conversations where you've legitimately learned things yourself?
Probably every week. I mean, there's always something to learn. Either in preparing for the show, I always learn things. The guests always have something interesting to say. And so I'm there with the listener. I mean, especially with guests. I'm just as curious as they are to hear what the answers are going to be.
You mentioned this a minute ago, David, and I wanted to ask, do you and or Katie, and I'll ask you to speak for her if you can, do you guys legitimately consider yourselves Mac Power users at this point, or do you feel you're still in sort of a state of acquiring knowledge and learning as well?
I think I would consider myself a Mac Power user. I mean, I write scripts and do all kinds of weird stuff, but but I'm also I think I'm more liberal with the definition of what a Mac Power user is than most people would give themselves credit for.
Meaning?
Well, I mean, getting good at keyboard shortcuts makes you a power user, and it's one of the easiest things you can do.
And that type of thing, meaning that you have familiarized yourself, or anyone might be able to familiarize yourself with something above and beyond sort of basic usage.
Yeah, I mean, there's two categories of people with computers. There's the people that say, okay, how does this thing work? I click here to send. Okay, now I've solved that problem, and that's as far as I want to go with this. And then there's a kind of person that says, that's great, but I have to send email 50 times a day. Is there a way I can do this faster and better? And then I say, oh, wait, there's a keyboard shortcut that is a lot faster and better. And they're just looking to make this stuff work better for them. Computers at the very basic level can work, but they can't work efficiently. And if you just put a little effort into them, and this is not just Macs, it's true for iPads and iPhones and Android and whatever else you use. If you put a little effort into saying, well, how can I really make this thing, work for me? You'll be surprised at how much faster you can get your work done. And people who have that desire are Mac Power users in my mind.
Yeah, and there's so many things to learn. I feel like I'm always learning from you and Katie and so many of the relay shows. When you guys started the show, like you mentioned, iOS was not even a thing yet, and it was out thereafter.
Well, it was a thing, but it was just getting started.
Gotcha. Apple has really expanded with platforms from watches to TVs to the phones and the tablets, and you guys have been around week in and week out, or show in and show out, for all of this expansion, from the iPad to the watch to the TV, so on and so forth. And I know you guys have been in almost all of it. Has it felt like, I don't know, more work or a broader playground, or were you hesitant to maybe not cover some of these things?
No, I think speaking for myself, I've been eager to jump in with both feet the whole way. I mean, I'm always interested in what's new and shiny and how can I make this thing work for me. I mean, one of the, I was talking to you earlier about how I have 2 iPads. And the interesting thing on that is for my mobile work, I have a big iMac at my office and I'm at it hours a day. But when I'm out and about, an iPad is my computer now. I don't they're announcing, as we record this, they're announcing new MacBooks tomorrow and it'll be out by the time the show publishes. But I really have little desire to buy a new MacBook. I mean, I don't think I need that anymore. And the last year or so, I've become even increasingly more convinced with the arrival of the iPad Pro that for most mobile workers, they're going to be just fine with an iPad. And there's some real advantages to it. But it's a whole new series of workflows to learn. It's a whole new series of tricks to master. And that stuff is candy for me. I love doing that.
Yeah, I'm right there with you. I'll tell you, if there was a better version of audio stuff for the iPad, be it podcasting. In my other life, I'm also a mobile DJ for the last 17 years. Yeah. If I could mobile DJ from an iPad Pro, somehow access an external hard drive with the music, the applications are there. It just has to be on-device storage. If somehow that could be done in a more effective way than, say, the wireless hard drive type thing. Other than that,
yeah.
If forever, any time in the future there was a way of making that happen, then I think I would be able to get rid of my MacBook Pro. I got the 13-inch 2015 Retina, and I'm like you're saying, I only use it when I have a wedding to DJ. Other than that, I have the 12.9 iPad Pro, and that is all I need around the house, except when I'm recording this show.
You've got an edge case, like audio is definitely one of those edge cases.
Yeah.
I would probably argue that film production is another. There's some things that it's just not up to the task yet, or the operating system just isn't hooked up in a way. I mean, there's definite limitations to it, but for most people that, write documents and answer email and surf the web and do Facebook and all that other stuff, it's just fine. I mean, like my sister, her Mac finally gave up the ghost and she didn't buy a new one. She's like, I don't even use it anymore. Everything is on her iPad.
So many of those stories, exactly. I mean, my brother and I convinced my mother, who had a 2009 Acer Windows laptop that died at the end of last year, to let us replace it with an iPad Air 2 for her. And she's been on that. This was last Christmas, so almost a year ago. Ever since then, we haven't heard a thing about, a laptop or Windows or anything. She literally, she takes pictures, she does Facebook and goes on the web. Boom. And that's all she ever needs, and she loves it. Takes it with her everywhere. It's perfect.
Yeah.
It's so many exciting stuff happen out there with that. And folks, if you are into this stuff like I am, like David is, check out Mac Power Users, because I'm telling you, I don't know if there's a better source for topical based information and learning, and that same interactivity between David and Katie we've been describing. It's a joy to listen to. I love the show that you guys are doing, for sure. But recently, you mentioned this, you started a second show with also previous guest on the Podcast Digest, Jason Snell. Take us behind the scenes, David. How did Free Agents get started?
So I worked in my law firm for, I think it was like 21 years or something, and decided on a whim one day to quit and go out on my own, which is exciting and terrifying all at once, especially when you have a kid in college. But I said, what the heck? Here we go. So I've been, like everything else in my life, I'm obsessive about these big things I get into and all the little things that come with being an independent worker. So I run a solo law firm at this point. I don't have any employees. I have people I contract with, but really it's just me. And it's a different way to practice law. I mean, the world is changing right now. There's lots and lots of people that have traditionally worked in big companies that are going out on their own. And I'm spending all my time thinking about it. And since I don't have a single unpublished thought, I talked to my friend Jason, who did the same thing. He was editor at Macworld magazine for many years and had gone out on his own very shortly before I did. And Jason lives in Northern California. I live in Southern California, but his in-laws live very near me. So every couple times a year for a long time, Jason would come down to visit his in-laws, and him and I would always have a meal together. And we were both going through that thing in our lives where we're like, man, I think I should get out of there and go out on my own. And then we'd kind of prop each other up and push each other back out into the world. And it was a very good relationship for kind of like helping us through this. And as we both actually did it, we were kind of giving each other support as well. And we decided, why don't we do a show where we talk about this stuff and maybe help a few other folks out? So we talked. This one did not take 4 to 6 months to organize. Once we knew we wanted to do it, we just had to figure out how to do it in a way that would make sense with our busy schedules. So that was the challenge there. It wasn't that the concept needed work. It was, how do we actually make this thing float? And I was really happy with kind of the solution we came up with. The kind of in the Mac Power Users mold, the show has what we call content shows and guest shows. And we try to block record them because this stuff isn't news based. You can do that. You don't need to, like a news show, you've got to record every week.
Right.
And we try to keep the show short. And Mac Power Users goes about an hour and a half. Free Agents, which is a show I do with Jason, goes about a half hour. So what we do is we have a list of content shows we want to work on. And once every month or two, we get on mic and we record 2 of those in one sitting. And then we want to do a guest show as well. So sometimes we'll do that the same day. So we'll do 2 content shows and then a guest show. Or sometimes we'll have to record the guest show at a different time, just depending on their availability. But the idea is in a morning, if give it up, one half of a day, you'll have enough content you'll have 3 shows done. So you have enough content for 6 weeks. So if everything works perfect, and like I said, in a morning, we can have enough content Free Agents for another 6 weeks. And then we talk to each other 6 weeks later again.
It's amazing to me because you two are probably 2 of the busiest people who are in my ears every week. And the fact that you guys are actually able to combine and release your own show on this topic is impressive. And it probably dictated this type of sort of scheduling and production schedule because you both, I think Jason Snell's on, what is he up to, like 43 weekly podcasts right now?
He's a busy guy. He's a busy guy.
And we've
he has
detailed
his own network in addition to what
exactly.
He does for
Yeah. Right? And we've detailed all your different titles and all the different things you've got your hands in. But I'm super happy that you guys were able to do it. I sort of like probably a large majority of the listenership to Free Agents has this little voice in the back of my mind, like, could I do something? Could I make something like this work? Someday maybe. And hearing 2 people who have made this successful transition kind of go over the various different topics that are involved with it sort of means that at some point, if I ever do decide to try to make the leap, I will feel like as if I've got this library of knowledge and conversation behind that decision. And I think what you guys are doing is great with the show. Not to mention great intro and theme song.
Yeah. We get a lot of comments. Chris Breen, our pal, who used to be at Macworld, now he's at Apple, but he's a professional musician. And we had we had stuff to begin with a name like Free Agents. We wanted to kind of have a 60s spy theme. So I think Chris even wrote it in the same key as the James Bond movie. It's I think it's E minor, but it's a great theme song. So listen to that if for no other reason. But we really like to try and bring content. The really great feedback, that show's in its infancy still, but we're already getting just really great feedback from people who are trying to make a decision to leap or not, and it's really rewarding. Some people write in and say, "Oh, I'm really inspired. I want to maybe do this." Or some people listen and say, "After listening to your show, I realized this isn't for me, and thanks for keeping me from making a mistake." So both types of feedback are really good.
And I love the way you guys are approaching it too. It makes so much sense because there is obviously, as it would be with the 2 of you, there is a certain technological flavor to it, which I think is awesome because I would, again, imagining myself in that potential situation in the future, be relying on things like some of the calendar things that you guys, I know a recent episode you guys went through, utilizing the calendar and reminders and kind of setting a routine and so on and so forth. And so I think it's a perfect thing for Relay FM and perfect to come from you two, having that particular ingredient in the conversation and because you guys are so wonderful at making that a pertinent element.
Well, thanks. Yeah, it really is. Like I said, the reason we were able to make time for it is because I think we're both passionate about doing it.
Yeah, it comes through. It comes through, and I couldn't think of two better people, other than, obviously the Mike and Steven, which is why I think it's perfect that it's homed at Relay, because this has been a road that we, regular Relay listeners, and I listen to probably 80% of their shows, you've heard Mike and Steven over sort of the course of Relay's life kind of document a bit about their process. And while simultaneously you guys were also going through a similar process, and now to have you two kind of cover this topic regularly, I think is a great place. And I know Mike was he was the first guest, right?
Yeah, he was our first guest.
Yeah, kind of digging into that as well. And I think it's a great show. And if folks, if anyone's considering, that, or even just wants to learn more about it, this is a great place to start.
It's interesting, the feedback on that show. We made it for people that are considering going indie or have recently gone indie and want some help. But the listenership is much more diverse than that. I mean, there's a lot of we hear from a lot of people who are like preachers who say, "Oh, this is really helpful for my job." Or we've heard from retirees who say, "No, some of the indie stuff you talk about makes sense for me as a retiree now." So it's a bigger draw than I thought it would be.
That's interesting. Why do you think it is? Because those are maybe home-based roles, per se?
I think they're independent roles.
Yeah.
They're roles where it's kind of up to you to make things happen. And I don't know. But, we're still figuring it out, to tell you the truth, like everybody else. But I think that's part of the attraction of it, because we also are willing to talk about our mistakes.
Right. Just a quick follow-up just popped in my head, David, when I said home-based. You are primarily, right, from your home with all of these projects? Is that correct?
Yeah, I am. I have an office. I'm a lawyer. I got to have an office, right? But
right.
After being in the big firm office for 20 some years, I think I have a bit of post-traumatic stress or something where I don't really want to get up and put a suit on and go into a fancy office every day. So I have a really nice home office.
And I know you've... No, go ahead.
So, and a lot of the work I do lends itself to being done at home, so it's nice.
I know you've covered this briefly on Mac Power Users, and I don't want to kind of usurp people going back and listening to this, but I think it fits here as we've covered so much of sort of your output, be it writing, be it the screencasts, be it these two podcasts, and of course, the day job as the lawyer, so to speak. Basing that all out of home, how do you manage that husband, that father, those roles, along with all these other tasks?
Well, I have an advantage. My kids are older. My children are 15, and the other one's about to become 20. So it's not like having toddlers running around that don't understand when daddy has to work. And
Right.
So that makes it easier. In fact, when they get to be teenagers, sometimes they prefer that I wasn't here as much as I am. But but it works fine, and my family's very respectful. They understand that I'm paying the bills with this stuff. So when I shut the door and I'm like right now recording with my friend about podcasting, they stay out of the way, and so it works out just fine. Occasionally, I do go out to like Starbucks or whatever just to kind of break things up. One of my other hacks is I try to block appointments. Today was my day. We're recording this in the afternoon. I had 5 appointments between 6 a.m. this morning and us sitting down to record today. So today was kind of a waste for me in terms of getting actual work done. But right. You got to do that when you have a business. You go meet with your clients and all that.
Do you think a dedicated space is absolutely essential to somebody who wants to even do part of what you've got on your plate?
Do you mean dedicated space by
like an office, a home office, spare bedroom, that type of thing?
I think it makes things a lot easier. I think it'd be very difficult to do it without space.
Yeah, I launched this show. I now live in the Philadelphia suburbs, and we came up here about 3.5 years ago, and it had a finished basement that I've now turned into sort of the podcasting studio with my desk and what have you. And I'm originally from the Virginia Beach area, and I try to imagine, in the free agent style of conversation about potentially doing this or any other type of work where we had a 4-bedroom ranch house, and it was me and my wife and 3 kids in 3 bedrooms. So if I ever tried to do something like this, it would have literally been like in the master bedroom, and the wife couldn't come into the bedroom. No, you can't come change your socks or something. You have to wait. And I'm just thinking that would be a difficult situation for, I imagine, most people try to pull off.
Yeah. Well, with my kids being older, that makes it easier. At some point, one of them or two of them will move out, and then we'll suddenly feel like we have too much space in our house. But I'm one of those weird dads. I'm not looking forward to that. I want them to stick around. But yeah, I think that whatever you're doing, you need to give yourself an environment where you can succeed. And that just depends. Some people are perfectly comfortable working, at the kitchen table. I mean, we did a show called Location on Free Agents, where we talked about all the different options. And these days, there's a lot of good ones out there. I mean, co-working, and there's a lot of places you can go to get work done now. So whatever you want to do, there's probably an option for you. And it's just a lot cheaper than it used to be. I mean, if I had started my own law practice 20 years ago, it would have cost me a lot more money than it does now.
Right. When you talk about, working space, even if it's out of the home, all I can think about is Cortex and CGP Grey and his stories. I'm not sure if you're a regular Cortex listener, but that's what's popping into my head right now with the guy with the phone calls. But
yeah.
Oh, well, we've covered a lot of great stuff here. And David, I really appreciate you taking the time. If folks are interested in Mac Power Users, Free Agents, or even any of these type of things, your books, your screencasts, where can folks find all the David Sparks things?
Yeah, if you want to just remember one thing, it's MacSparky. So if you go to MacSparky.com or MacSparky on Twitter, you'll find links to everything. If you want to specifically find the podcasts, go over to relay.fm/MPU for Mac Power Users, or relay.fm/free agents for the free agents.
And I couldn't recommend either one of those more. I've only read one of your books, David. That was the paperless one. I read that, what was it, 3 or 4 years ago, somewhere in that window, right? That you released that.
Yeah,
I plowed through that on the iPad not long after that came out. I know I'll throw my recommendation behind that, although I'm sure just about everything that David has done is worth checking out, folks. And I'm going to, of course, as always, include all these links in the show notes, and I encourage you guys to check it out. David Sparks, thank you again for taking the time. I really appreciate it.
Thank you, Dan. My pleasure.
And that's it, folks. That's my interview with David Sparks. Hope you enjoyed. I had a great time talking to David. If you did enjoy the show, please tell a friend about it. If you know somebody who is potentially considering working for themselves or big into Mac stuff like me, tell them about David's shows, and tell them about the Podcast Digest, where I take you behind the scenes of some of the best shows out there and tell you how these things really work and what goes into making them. So share it on your social networks, tell a friend, write up a blog review of it, anything you like. Review on iTunes is greatly appreciated, and of course, checking out the Patreon link would be wonderfully appreciated as well. Also, don't forget to check out this week's show sponsor if you're a podcaster or considering starting your own, podbean.com/TPD. If you're thinking of starting one or looking for a new home, you'll get your first month for free if you sign up with that special URL, so you can try all of Podbean's awesome hosting features. Folks, that'll do it for episode 114. Come back next week. Episode 115 is going to be another awesome one. Got some great stuff coming up for you guys, and I really hope you like it. If you do, tell me about it. Tell me what you think of the show. Really do. I want to hear it. Till next week, folks, my name is Dan Lizette for the Podcast Digest.
Thank you for listening to the Podcast Digest. You can follow the show on Twitter @PodDigest. Like the show on Facebook at facebook.com/The Podcast Digest. Email the show feedback at thepodcastdigest@gmail.com. And you can find all the previous episodes and exclusive blog entries at the show's website, thepodcastdigest.info.